Hi, I'm Melanie Meyers, Director of Collections and Engagement here at the American Jewish Historical Society. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit to give you an introduction to one of my favorite things that I love the best about working at the AJHS, and that is our amazing collection of cookbooks entirely related to American Jewish cooking. We have somewhere in the realm of 400 to 500 American Jewish cookbooks here, drawn from a variety of sources. Some are professionally produced, done by professional cooks and chefs and published by major publishing houses. Some of them are self-published, and a great many of them are actually produced by organizations such as Hadassah or different Jewish communal organizations in order to fundraise and to raise money for activities within their communities. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with these. I'm sure your mom or your grandma had quite a few of these on her shelves. And those actually are some of my favorite items that we have here. But today, what we're really going to talk more about is why would we have all of these cookbooks? Why would a place such as AJHS collect all of these cookbooks? And what do they say to us about American Jewish history? One of the things that I think is really the most important about looking at this collection of cookbooks en masse is what they show us about Jewish life in America. And these cookbooks are from literally all 50 states here in America, and encompass also a range of different cuisines that are frequently regional. So when I look at these cookbooks, I see things like, well, immigration and migration stories. I see adaptation. When I look at a book, for example, like Kosher Cajun, one of my personal favorites, or matzo ball gumbo, what these obviously were written for were for Jewish women who are migrating to the South and who are looking for ways to make kosher versions of what are already the popular regional cuisines. And we see this pattern replicated all over the country, whether it's the ladies in Denver talking about shalom on the range, whether it's cookbooks that tell you how to make kosher versions of virtually every different kind of cuisine, from Chinese to French to Italian. And so one of the other ways we're going to talk about adaptation here too is the idea of adapting to Thanksgiving and adapting to the idea of, well, so how can we make a different version on a pumpkin pie? How can we adapt a very traditional American ingredient, the pumpkin, the squash, which is normally made into a pie, but how can we look at two different recipes that take two very different approaches on how to make this their own? Through the Sephardic cookbook, where we're going to learn how to make pumpkin burekas, and through the Sabra cookbook, where we are going to make a pumpkin pie, but it's going to be a Sabra alcohol flavored pumpkin pie. So in that one, we see the addition of an Israeli alcoholic beverage into what is normally a tradition pumpkin pie recipe, and allowing different cooks all over the United States to make these recipes their own.
We're here today with Hasia Diner, historian of the American Jews and professor at New York University. She's written scores of books, but one in particular brings her here today, which is the book Hungering for America, about the immigrant foodways of Jews, Irish, and Italians. But I'm thinking about Hinda Amchanitsky's 1901 cookbook, where one of her, she has a recipe for cranberry strudel, which makes me wonder whether this came out of the kind of the bringing together of the East European strudel and the cranberry as the
essence of America, the American berry. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is just emblematic again of the ability of Jews, and by the way, other immigrants also, to fuse the food ingredients or styles or modes of preparation that they liked with both American realities, okay, and as a way of marking themselves to be part, to incorporate, literally to ingest America in their Jewish or Italian or Chinese or whatever kind of way. Something like pumpkin could never have been part of the Sephardic or Ashkenazi tradition before migration, because it's a New World food. And it's in the same category with, so many of these other products that now several of those New World foods revolutionized the world, namely potatoes and corn. Okay, but pumpkin was really a provincially American food. But I would say Jews, like other immigrants, they come to a place where there are new ingredients. And some of those new ingredients, maybe they don't just seem too wrong. But in most cases, those new ingredients, so long as they don't jar with the conventional or the known food way, get incorporated into dishes that were never made with, pumpkin before, but there's no reason to think that, Jewish immigrants from Rhodes or Yanina or any of those places in the Ottoman Empire didn't do the same thing that all immigrants do, which is say, hey, pumpkin, that looks like it can fit into the bureka. It can be spiced with either new spices that we're only meeting in America, like nutmeg, or spices we knew from back home.
So one of the recipes that our wonderful culinary historian is going to explore today comes from a book that is Sephardic holiday cooking, recipes and traditions, published here in the United States in 1986. And this book was written by a woman named Gilda Angel, who was a food columnist professionally, and herself is of Ashkenazi background, but she married a Sephardic rabbi, Rabbi Mark Angel, who was the rabbi for Sharit Israel. So she ended up sort of developing a culture within her home that mixes these two, sort of a little bit of Ashkenazi, but also where she, through her husband's work at Sharit Israel, she really immersed herself a lot more in the Sephardic culture and really grew to have a great and deep appreciation for the Sephardic cuisine, for the Sephardic holiday menus. And as such, she wrote this book, and her husband also writes an introductory essay as well, to show more people in the United States where Ashkenazi cooking tends to more be the default in terms of what people traditionally think of as Jewish food. And so she wrote this book as a how-to for other Jewish cooks to be able to explore this totally different aspect of Jewish cuisine within their own homes.
In something that Mrs. Gilda Angel wrote, she talked about, when she marries Mark Angel, and she said the lids came off my mother-in-law's pots. And so she then, in the couple paragraphs, talked about herself as essentially becoming Sephardic by incorporating the foods of her mother-in-law. Now, she never, in that art, again, it's just a few paragraphs, but I bet, again, as a, from a point of view of evidence or data, one could find lots of material like that. She, never talks about her husband then starting to love Kishka and Helzel and
right. She's brought in to continue the tradition of the mother-in-law.
And the only thing in that little piece that she said is, I still like on Hanukkah one night to have one latke. And so again, it doesn't mean that these few paragraphs are the sum total of the fusion that took place.
And the second category of cookbook is absolutely one of my favorites because we have many exemplars here in the collection. And these are the cookbooks that were not written by individuals or by sisterhoods, but were written by companies. And why were they written by companies? To get you to buy their product. And we have quite a few of these. My personal favorite is the one that was done by Procter & Gamble in the 1930s to introduce an entirely new immigrant group of observant women to the joys of what else but Crisco, because it's kosher and it's shelf stable and you can use it in all of your different savory and sweet cooking endeavors. My favorite thing about that cookbook, though, is that it's published in both Yiddish and English, and the way it was written, and the authors specify this, it is written so a Yiddish-speaking mother and an English-speaking daughter can follow along with the cookbook simultaneously and cook together, which is pretty amazing. We also have ones from places you'd expect, like, say, Manischewitz. But this beauty that we unearthed, this is the Sabra cookbook. And what is Sabra? I do not mean the hummus. I mean the alcohol. I mean the Israeli alcohol. that you can see the great picture of the extremely elaborate bottle there on the front. And here we have 101 award-winning recipes. Evidently 8,000 recipes were submitted in a national contest, and the winners were chosen by Gourmet Magazine. And wow, there are some interesting recipes in here. I would not have thought of using an orange liqueur with fish, but you know, a lot of these recipes are very interesting. But so Sarah Lohman, keeping with the pumpkin theme, is going to show us how to make a pumpkin pie using Sabra.
I guess my question to you is that if you were able to ask questions of viewers, of families in 2020, what their Thanksgiving is going to be like, what should they be asking people around the table at their Thanksgivings with regard to food? So in other words, if our viewers were to collect their own food history of their communities, what are the kinds of questions you would want them to be asking so that you or another historian could document this?
Yeah, so, you know, our 2020 Thanksgiving table is slightly mythic, or it's going to be virtual since very few people will be gathering with large groups. But I think a couple things. So first, I would ask people around our mythic virtual Zoom Thanksgiving, you know, to talk about the multiple backgrounds from which they come. And then also the question of, how does the Thanksgiving you're having today, 2020, again, forgetting the ravages of the pandemic, let's take us back to 2019 or hopefully to 2021. How does this differ from the one you had when you were growing up? In other words, how has it evolved over time?
I love the idea of people starting to kind of collect stories and invite the people who they're on the Zoom call with to share their own Thanksgiving stories and stories of adaptation. And that point too about understanding the diverse influences that have shaped not only our own families, but the whole country, to kind of, there's so few times where we're all doing the same things. And there's so few, so to kind of take this as an opportunity to, while you are all together, to learn about each other and the history, whether of your own family or of others, I think is a great way. And what we're going to see now is Sarah Lohman is going to make for all of you. She's made a pumpkin pie with Sabra Liqueur, and she'll also show you how to make the pumpkin burekas that we've been talking about in this conversation.
And do your talking heads get pies in the mail?
We'll send some in the mail. Perfect. Actually, great. You're not that far away. We can walk them over to you. Although Sarah is in Ohio, so that makes it a little more complicated. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, can I take 1 minute on the Sabra Liqueur?
Sure. Yeah. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that you know, in the post-1948 American Jewish world, there emerged a kind of a stream of activity coming out of Zionist organizations, and then infusing broader swaths of American Jewry about the marketing of Israeli products. And this is a whole kind of industry in Israel, which is making this stuff for export. And then American Jews essentially are involved in trying to drum up not only business for Israel, which his economy was pretty shaky, but also to drum up support by the marketing of Israel. And Sabra, I believe, from probably the early 1960s, is the first Israeli-ish, and I say ish because it's not really, that is marketed and consumed and touted by American Jews as a way to support Israel by buying an Israeli type product. But again, if we think about food as a way to ingest something, you know, you're ingesting America by every time you have a hot dog, that it's a way to make Israeli culture part of you is to drink the Sabra. Or to, I'd never heard of it until you told me about having it in pumpkin pie, but hey, why not, you know? And I think pumpkin pie often does have a little orangish or some kind of citrusy.
Right, you can put like orange grape zest and
yeah. I've never baked it, but I mean, in a sense, it's fascinating that this recipe is out there, and I would love to know, where this ad appeared, where the ads for it appeared. Again, like Hadassah magazine, I think used to have a lot, and the Pioneer Women magazine used to have recipes and a lot of recipes from national manufacturers, like Bronfman would have been, it's big business. It's not just selling to Jews. So I think it'll be really interesting to do it in that, to a kind of look at all the places where it was advertised and where this recipe appeared.
Absolutely, and especially since there was this contest for inviting the users of Sabra, so that the idea for the pumpkin pie, putting it in, that came from Mrs. Sharon Bernstein of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we're back to Milwaukee.
We never leave.
We never leave, yes. But thank you again.
My pleasure.
Oh, hello. Welcome to my home. I am Sarah Lohman, culinary historian and author of the book 8 Flavors, The Untold Story of American Cuisine. And I was just putting some of the finishing touches on my Sabra Be Thankful pumpkin pie, which appears in the 1970 Sabra cookbook. And don't worry, we will be offering recipes all on the AJHS blog all week. There it is. You want to take a closer look? I'm thinking maybe I should cut a slice. I haven't given it a try yet. The whipped cream as well, of course, has Sabra in it, so let's be generous. Now, I noticed from the poll that actually quite a few of you have had Sabra Liqueur before, but for the 37% of you that haven't, should we have a little tasty taste? This is not available in Cleveland, Ohio, where I live. The blog is on the AJHS website. I'm sure someone's going to drop a link in the chat for you. This, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, in the chat by the AJHS, was bought and shipped to me from the depths of Crown Heights, which of course is where you're going to find a beautiful bottle of Israel's favorite chocolate orange liqueur. It is a chocolate orange flavor, which is why it pairs so well, as Hasia was saying, with holiday dishes. Let's give it a try. L'chaim. Oh, it's quite nice. I'm always a little nervous about liqueurs because I just think they're going to be like really like sticky, syrupy, sweet. And don't get me wrong, this is sweet, but it kind of tastes like a really good dark chocolate orange bar, So working with the recipe, I went ahead and I made myself a Sabra Be Thankful pie because pie is my favorite part of Thanksgiving. So I figured why not get an early start. So as I mentioned, there is Sabra in the whipped cream, basically instead of vanilla or almond extract or whatever else you might put in there. And the pie is like a pretty typical pumpkin pie with maybe a few changes. It's got your cinnamon, it's got your ginger. It's made with brown sugar and honey, which I think is sort of interesting. And then evaporated milk is the dairy in there. That first slice of pie, it's always the hardest one to get out. Don't judge me based on it. I do like that it has a little bit of orange zest in it to sort of complement. Oh, there we go. To complement the Sabra. And it's been, of course, it has a 1/4 cup of Sabra in the pumpkin pie itself. So let's see how it tastes. Let me get a fork out. I'm making you jealous that I'm eating pumpkin pie. It does look pretty delicious. Now, I will say the strange part about this recipe is it calls for a 9-inch pie crust. But I had a full cup of like liquid pumpkin mix left over. So I made myself a second tiny pumpkin pie because why not? All right, happy Sabra Thanksgiving. Ooh, it's got a nice, it's not over baked. It's got a nice like creaminess to it. You just want to bake a pumpkin pie until it's still jiggling. You don't want it to be super firm. Let's see how this tastes. Tastes exactly like a pumpkin pie. Can you make it parve? Good question. Most pumpkin recipes, because they're sort of a pumpkin pudding, do have some kind of dairy. Classically, it's going to be a whole milk or a cream. In the contemporary, it's usually evaporated milk. I have never made a par pumpkin pie. You might have to do some Googling. I can't figure out what you might use to get that same, yes, Linda, great question. What would I use instead? That's what I'm sort of puzzling on. You know what? Investigate some vegan pumpkin pie recipes, because for the crust, you can, of course, use Crisco. Yeah, maybe coconut cream. I wouldn't use something so sweet. I would go with something that has some fat in it. So I'd go with like a coconut milk as opposed to a coconut cream. Ooh, especially if you can find a Thai brand. The Thai brands of coconut cream tend to have a little extra fat in them, and that makes everything very nice and creamy. And yeah, if you get a coconut milk, that's going to be unsweetened as opposed to a coconut cream. Yeah, you can go with soy with a non-dairy creamer. I think if I were going to pick, if you like coconut, I would go with coconut. Or listen to Janice. She does this every year. Coffee rich, is it liquid or solid? You people are crazy. You're not crazy for keeping kosher, but I'm a little suspicious of like non-dairy creamer. Go with my book's coconut milk, but I'm not here to judge. It's got a great texture. I barely taste the Sabra. You know what? It's all a grand experiment. Pumpkin pie. There it is a little bit. Okay, it's a good pumpkin pie, but if you want to try this, I think maybe you could add a little bit more Sabra into it. But I'm also going to be demoing a recipe for you today. Is it more noticeable whipped cream? That's what you want to give it a little taste of whipped cream. No. Where would I add more Sabra? In the pie, maybe we can go up to like 1/3 of a cup, but maybe it's not, I don't know, maybe it's not even worth it. You know, the thing about working with historical recipes, sometimes they just don't work out. It's a great textured pumpkin pie. I would say it's very flavorful. So maybe it's not so much that the Sabra needs to come through. Maybe it is just giving it a sort of deeper, beautiful element that is making the other flavors richer. But I will say, as far as like texture and like, I mean, it's a good pumpkin pie. You know what? I think if you really wanted to come through, the whipped cream that the Sabra cookbook recommends only has 3/4 of a teaspoon. I think you could probably bump that up to a tablespoon. And it's much less, you have a lot less to lose by experimenting with the whipped cream and adding more Sabra than you do having to recipe test the whole pumpkin pie a couple times. So, and you only make, only use about a cup of heavy whipping cream when you're making the whipped cream. So I think you could probably go up to a tablespoon. It might add a little bit of color, but it's going to be the same like beautiful brown caramely color as the bottle. And I don't think that's such a bad thing. All right, so there's taste test number 1 out of the way, but that's not the only recipe we have planned for you. Let me get rid of my pie. So we talked a little bit about burekas, and today we're going to be making bureka de calabaza, which is from the 1980 Sephardic holiday cooking cookbook. I loved hearing this story of the author cooking with her mother-in-law, because as I was cooking through this recipe, that is exactly the sort of vibe that I got from it. Have any of you ever had the experience of your mother-in-law, grandmother has this recipe that you really love, and then you know, some holiday food that you eat every year, and you say, hey, can you give me that recipe? And they say, what do you mean recipe? There's no recipe. So then you stand next to them in the kitchen and you try to copy it down. Like, have you all done this dance before? I can picture it in my mind. And by the way, I think I should mention on this that I'm teaching a recipe writing class tonight. If you're interested in it, go to my website, sarahlohman.com, or I bet AJHS could put the link in the chat, because I was thinking about it while I was reading this recipe. Because let me show you. So I tried this last night because, okay, if you're familiar with burekas, they're usually made with a phyllo dough, and they're usually like a meat pie. But this, I think, is just a word. Thank you, AJHS. I'm sort of using them in place of like a pie or turnover. And calabaza is the word for pumpkin. This is, the recipe names are in Ladino or Spanish, which is the language of the Sephardic people. So I followed the recipe to a T last night. Let me just show you how they turn out. So these are the ones that I made in the first place. These little These little monsters here. Even for professionals, it doesn't turn out right the first time. And part of what was going on with this recipe is that it was telling me to roll it out to a 4-inch diameter disc, which is about like that, and then put a tablespoon of filling into it. So I spent my evening last night. I worked out a way to make these look just so cute and beautiful and so tasty. And then inside there is this beautiful spiced pumpkin filling. What a cute thing. Put them in a box and send them to your relatives far away. So I'm going to share with you my secret. And I'm going to try to keep up on the questions. They're always a little bit hard for me to see while I'm cooking, but perhaps somebody can ask them of me. Someone can moderate for me. Here we go. So I made the filling in advance because one recipe actually makes quite a bit of filling that, again, you aren't going to be using all of it. You have to, it's really easy to overfill turnovers. And so if the filling comes out the side, we don't want that. But in here is a can of pumpkin. There is an egg. There is a little bit of flour. There is cinnamon. In Sephardic American recipes, the sweets tend to lean towards being pretty simple in terms of spicing. It's usually cinnamon and orange. This doesn't have any orange zest in it, but, you know, if you wanted to put some in, I don't think it would hurt. And I also think that you could add some other spices if you want to, but I'm a big cinnamon fan, so I just went with that. Also has brown sugar, and then it also has some walnuts in it too. And I chopped and I also toasted my walnuts too, because I think that just sort of blooms their flavor a little bit and it's a little bit nicer. In retrospect, I would chop them a little bit finer because, again, you're putting a pretty small amount of filling in every one of the burekas. So feel free to do like a fine chop, maybe even a light chop. The recipe, I saw that question. The recipe calls for light brown sugar, but you know what? If you only have dark brown sugar in your house and you don't mind that sort of richer flavor of the dark brown, I say go with dark brown. It's not going to hurt. With a filling, there's a lot of flexibility. We're not as reliant on sort of chemistry and texture as we are with like a dough or a pastry. So you can feel free to manipulate it and change it to your own taste too. Now the dough actually felt quite familiar. It is a dough that I have seen a lot in Sephardic American recipes. So this book is from 1986. So we're talking about, yeah, she's following around her mother-in-law, who maybe herself was an immigrant, or maybe her mother-in-law was first generation. Oh, they are immigrants from Peru. Great. But I'm thinking in terms of the diaspora from the Middle East too. So it sounds like their family probably came from Turkey, Greece, or Italy, went to Peru, and then immigrated from Peru then to America. So a lot of the recipes that I've seen that have been sort of out of Turkey, out of the mother culture for many years as they evolve, especially in America, tend to use this type of dough that I'm going to make for you, which is an olive oil based dough. The Sephardic immigrants were known, like within Jewish communities. Other Jewish people were confused by them because they weren't using schmaltz to keep kosher. They were using oil. And there's an oral history from the Seattle area that says that this person's family was called the Mazzolas. Like the kids on the playground would tease her and call her Mazzola because her family used corn oil to cook as opposed to schmaltz. So this recipe calls for vegetable oil kind of generically because olive oil was relatively hard to find in America in the 1980s. But today we can use olive oil, which would have been the top pick of the Sephardic immigrant. So this is our fat in our pastry. There's a recipe that I've worked with before when I worked at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum that came from the Confino family, who are these Sephardic immigrants that we focused on within the museum. And it was actually a recipe for baklava cookies. So it was like baklava filling wrapped in a really simple cookie recipe. And this is essentially the same dough. That one just had a little bit more sugar. So this sort of basic olive oil based dough becomes really popular within Sephardic communities in America by the mid 20th century. So olive oil, 1 cup of olive oil, 2/3 cup of water. Don't worry, this is going to be on the blog too with my corrections, additions, and help after cooking through it. We need a teaspoon of salt as well. Have I missed any other important or relevant questions? I'm glad there's a healthy kosher pumpkin pie discussion going on. Teaspoon salt goes in. Something to kind of interesting about this recipe is that a little bit of cinnamon goes into the dough. I have not noticed a lot, making a huge difference in the flavor of the dough, but it does add a beautiful color. I saw a question pop up, did they make this olive oil dough in Turkey? As far as I can tell, a lot of the desserts within Turkey was going to be something more like a halva, the sesame paste sweetened sweet. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. It's that Sabra kicking in. Or it's something made with a phyllo dough. And again, bureka, if you've had it before, they're usually like a phyllo dough meat pie. So this type of dough seems to sort of come into its own within America. We're a big cookie making culture. Sephardic Jews also become known for Sarah Liqueur, which is a Hanukkah cookie. And it is the same like basic kind of olive oil sweetened plain dough. So it seems to be a little bit of an adaptation as Sephardic Jews are coming here and they're combining their own culinary traditions of cooking with oil, specifically olive oil, because of the region they are from, around the Mediterranean, and then combining it with American traditions. In this case, kind of this is kind of like a hand pie is how I describe it, a pumpkin hand pie. There are pumpkin recipes from back in Turkey because after the Columbian exchange, that's 1492, when American ingredients started going over to Europe and Asia and Africa as well, there was a Asiatic gourd that people cooked with, but American pumpkins and squashes were better tasting, easier to cook with. So it really rapidly replaced recipes so that a lot of people in Europe, the Middle East, the Mediterranean were cooking with pumpkin even by the 15th and 16th centuries. So there are pumpkin recipes, but nothing quite like this. Any sugar in dough? No. So this is how it does differ from the cookie recipes I've seen, in that there's no sugar added to the dough. However, this is like, you're really gonna like these if you love pie crust. Like these are a really sort of crispy, crunchy, dunkable cookie, but that's why it's really key to make sure we roll it really thin, because it is a lot of like dry pie dough in your mouth if you roll that outside too thick. So I've got essentially my wet ingredients in there, and then to that I'm gonna add a total of 4 cups of flour. I'm gonna do that 2 cups at a time. And you want to be fairly accurate with these measurements. I am a pretty like slapdash baker. I'm pretty relaxed, but with this, you especially don't want to add too much flour because you end up with a really, really tough dough. This is like a really strong dough. This is also why it took a little bit to work through the process. Here, let me give you a little eye on the texture there. Because if you try to roll it out like you would a pie crust or some cookies that you're going to cut out, man, it will fight you. You will roll it and then it will snap back and you'll try to roll it again and it's like, I'm not going to do it. All right, so nice and wet. So now we're going to add our final 2 cups of flour in there. So the key to this is opposed to rolling it out. We're actually going to roll this into small balls and then we're going to roll those out from there. And that just helps to make sure that this dough stays nice and thin and is in a nice proportion to the filling. I'm just getting a bigger spoon out. When you open a fresh bag of flour, you always want to fluff it, by the way. And the most accurate way to measure it by volume is to spoon it into a cup and then even out the top. I'm making a mess. I always make a mess on pastry day. Okay, in goes my 2nd cup of flour. You can get in here with your hands if you want to as well. And this is when it's really gonna start to become a nice dry dough. The recipe calls for 2 1/4 cups, but it says do not add that 2nd cup of flour unless you really think you need it. It wants to be a little bit softer than a pie dough. Unlike a pie dough, which you really shouldn't manipulate with your hands, because you want the butter to not melt, with an olive oil dough, you can get in here and sort of use your hands to work the flour in a little bit. See? Coming together. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm not worried about getting every little bit of flour in there. So now comes the time when we roll it out. I have a bigger kitchen than when I lived in New York, but it's still not the biggest kitchen. Okay. So here's what we're gonna do. You're gonna pinch off some dough. You wanna roll it into a ball about 2 inches in diameter, like that. My rolling pin actually has a ruler on it, so I can actually kind of pop it on. So it looks pretty good. You don't have to do these one at a time, but I am for demo purposes. Then you're gonna roll it. So you wanna roll it fairly round. And so to do that best, you sort of roll out from the center. If it doesn't work out, like mine is not, don't worry, I've got a fix for you. A little bit of flour down here wouldn't hurt either. So the key really is to just try to roll it thin, okay? And then before I fill it, I pick it up and flip it just to make sure it's not sticking. All right, so the recipe says a scant tablespoon. I think that might have been a typo. You really want a scant teaspoon of filling in the middle. It does not seem like a lot. It does not look like a lot, but just about like that is what you're looking for. Then you fold it over. It's okay if you get a little mess coming out the side there. You can even wipe it off. And you're going to use the tines of a fork to really press and seal it together, okay? So the last tip, the recipe says you can use the blade of a sharp knife to cut off all of these straggles here because she knew it was going to happen. Hello. But what I've discovered you can use is you can use a biscuit or a cookie cutter and then just line it up. And that's going to give you just a really beautifully round little hand pie. See? And you peel it off, put it on your cookie sheet. I'm going to do one more for you, and then I will show you how to finish these off. Okay. So you pinch off your dough, roll it into a disc by 2 inch diameter. It's okay, but just to come off a little bit like that. Roll it out, nice and thin. See, you can really transform something that is kind of a mess. I also feel like I definitely am missing some like immigrant mother-in-law superpowers that don't get passed down to the next generation. I have an immigrant grandmother and she was from Scotland, so to be honest, she was not much of a cook. Okay, about 1/8 of an inch thick is what you're looking for as far as the dough. See, it can be a very difficult dough to work with. You know what, if it starts getting really bad, never be afraid to start again. All right, filling goes in there, boop, 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 scant teaspoon. Fold it over, push it down a little bit, shape it, seal it with the fork. Do, do, do. Okay. And then the secret to making it look like it was perfect in the first place, cut it with that biscuit cutter. Oh, that one's not a great one. Shall we do one more? Are there any other questions out there? I got to get rid of this poll to see them. And then after you get your whole cookie rack filled, it says an ungreased baking sheet, but I really think a greased baking sheet is where it's at. I always want to make sure that my cookies can come off. We're going to do a little bit of an egg wash, and that's just going to make it look nice and brown. Last night, I followed the recipe. It said just to use an egg and a little bit of water, and they just didn't turn out as brown as I wanted to. Oh, this one's a nice one. So I actually now have an egg that I added a little bit of cream to, since I had it around from making my Sabra whipped cream. So we're going to do a wash on top, and that's not a flavor thing. That is just for color. But of course, if you are keeping kosher, just do egg and water. And I'll show you another way to make it pretty. Oh, look at that. That's a beaut. I feel confident ending on this one. And you can do a fancier trim on these if you want to, but I sort of like the simplicity of just the forks. And there we go, cute. So then once you have your whole tray full of them, we'll do our wash. Again, if this is dairy meal, you can use cream. If you are not keeping kosher, you can use milk or cream. And if you are, go ahead and just use the egg and the water, because other than that, there's no other dairy in this recipe. Give it a little wash. It'll come out nice and brown. And then no matter what wash you do, just to make it pretty, a little sprinkle of cinnamon. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big cinnamon fan. And then you can just use a little bit of regular sugar, but I have the sparkling sugar that is basically called sanding sugar. So it is a really coarse grained sugar that just gives it a really beautiful sparkle. So I give it a little bit of that too. So let's go into the oven for 20 to 25 minutes at 375. And they come out crispy and pie crusty and beautiful. So there you are. Not only will the Sabra pumpkin pie recipe be in the blog this week, but also the burekas recipe will. And I love the idea that there was this cookbook made with an alcohol, using in food recipes. But I thought it would be fun then to take one of those food recipes and sort of then reverse engineer it back into a cocktail. So I'm also going to be posting this week a cocktail recipe of a pumpkin spice hot buttered Sabra, which will be a really great warm up to your Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe a really great sort of after dinner treat as well. Any questions that I missed? I can kind of take a look. Make it bigger so everyone gets more pumpkin. I think that's a great question. You have to, so even though it seems like a small amount of pumpkin is going in, it's actually like a surprising amount of filling, because it's going to get it's going to fluff up a little bit because of the flour in there. So it's more about the proportion of crust to pumpkin. If it's bigger, there's a little bit more worry of will it cook through? Will it burn? I can't give you, you have to work out those times and temperatures on your own, because that is not the recipe that Sephardic holiday cooking has given us. Sorry. Other else, please share creations. Oh yeah, all of it will go in there. Send photos, tag it on Instagram and Facebook. And I think that's all the questions I see. Can I make them in advance, keep you in the fridge so you want to bake? Sorry, that was very quick. Can you make them in advance and keep them in the fridge so you want to bake them? I don't see why not. Yeah, I don't think it would hurt them at all. They will take, if you go straight from the fridge to the oven, which you can do, they're just going to need a little bit longer cooking time. So just make sure you're seeing something that is a little golden brown on the bottom. Get your spatula in there, take a peek underneath. So if they're at room temperature and it's going to be a 20 to 25 minute cooking time, if it comes from the fridge, you might be looking at 30 or 35 minutes, okay? So just rely on visual information. And also they smell really lovely when they're about to be done too. Happy Thanksgiving. I'm covered in flour, I noticed. I hope that these recipes have given you some inspiration. You can follow me at Instagram at 4 Pounds Flour. I'm posting tons of historical recipes this week. And of course, all those recipes are going to be up on the AJHS blog this week. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a peaceful, restful, loving holiday. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.